Well, hello again, Liberty lovers. Welcome to another exciting interview on Good Morning Liberty. My name is Josh Martins, and joining me today is Oscar Gill-Lewis. Now, Oscar is a writer and political commentator for Young Voices UK, and he is the editor for Speak Freely magazine. So, Oscar, welcome to the show.
Hi, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, you recently wrote an article for the Conservative Home about the current nanny state in the UK. And to be honest, I didn't really know much about this. So I found that article interesting. And I'm excited to jump into that. But before we discuss that, why don't you take a few minutes to introduce yourself to the audience and kind of give them your 2-minute liberty story and how you got passionate about the sides of liberty?
Absolutely. So like you said, I'm a Young Voices contributor and political commentator, and I'm also an editor for Speak Freely magazine. So how I came to liberty, or to a liberty perspective, is I grew up rather apolitical, not really interested much in politics. And then one day I came across lectures of Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman on YouTube, and I found their perspectives quite convincing and quite interesting. And that sort of led me down the rabbit hole of discovering sort of more profound thinkers in the liberty space, such as Robert Nozick and Friedrich Hayek, and reading their books and investigating more. And I found groups like Students for Liberty, of which I'm a member and a coordinator, and meeting other young people in the liberty space has been sort of very profound for me. Meeting other young people, which is for an ideology, a way of thinking, is quite rare in the world. Finding other people a similar age to me and from similar backgrounds was very inspiring. And so I've pursued liberty through writing and through political commentary.
Awesome. You're definitely benefited to find liberty at such a young age. I consider myself a recovering conservative. I was at your age. I was your typical, neoconservative. I was that our military needed to control everything around the world and be the police of the world and all those kind of things. And it took a long time to really open my eyes to liberty and just liberty around the world and seeing beyond the U.S. borders and just all the other places and the people that are fighting the same fight all around the world. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, because your article was very interesting to me about some of the things happening in the UK. And we've heard stories, like certainly stuff about the free speech side and people actually being jailed for their opinions, or I think they're calling it misinformation and things like that. But I didn't hear about this smoking ban and some of these other taxes on kind of your liberty to eat or smoke or do what you want with your own body. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your article and about the smoking ban and kind of what's going on and kind of just what's happening over there in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wrote the article because the smoking ban in the UK, which has garnered, unfortunately, bipartisan support, it seems to be something that politicians on both sides of the pond seem to applaud themselves and pat themselves on the back for, look at this bill, it's bipartisan support. But those tends to be the bills that actually hurt most people, or at least from my perspective, hurt the most people. So the smoking ban, attacks on smokers go back many decades and have the policies have been instituted by both Labour, the centre-left party in the UK, and the Conservative Party, the centre-right party in the UK. And so this bill recently came, our previous Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, suggested that he would institute a generational smoking ban, which would basically mean that anybody born after the year 2008 or 2009 would no longer be able to buy cigarettes legally. But if you were born before this year, you could. So if you can imagine, many decades down the line, when I'm 65 and my friend is 64, that I can perfectly and safely and legally buy cigarettes in a shop, but then my friend who's 64 can't. So that was particularly disastrous and quite dangerous in the UK. And then there are other smoking bans along with this. So stopping people smoking outside of hospitals, children's parks or parks in general, and then also the more pernicious one, not being able to smoke outside of pub gardens, which is a key revenue driver for a lot of pubs in the UK. And so basically, I wanted to write this article against what I see as the nanny state in the UK, trying to control how people live and act.
Yeah. The generational ban I found rather shocking, because that's the first time, like we had smoking bans in the US. It usually was more indoor smoking, like it was because it was considered an infringement upon the non-smokers that wanted to be maybe in the bar, or they wanted to be in the restaurant, and they were having to breathe that smoked air. But you could go outside and like, this is the first I've heard of a ban that not only bans it outside, but it also is banning a generation. And so, like, it's basically saying that you don't have the right to do what you want to do with your body if you were born after a certain date. And I found that just to be a drastic violation of somebody's self-ownership. How is this now? Those of us in America, we don't have the same kind of healthcare system. Do you think that the parties feel like they can implement these kind of bans on people's bodies and control on people's bodies because they also are paying for your healthcare over there? Do you think that the two are related?
It's an interesting thought, because the NHS, the National Health Service, is particularly deified in the UK. So during the pandemic, every Tuesday at 8 p.m, we would go outside with pots and pans and clang them in support of nurses. I recommend that Americans go to a police officer's house and do that, and see how much they enjoy that for their support, for their service. But in terms of other systems like the Singapore healthcare system, people tend to care more about their daily actions, what they eat, how often they go to the gym, how often they exercise. They tend to care more about that in Singapore, but people's or others, I suppose the way to put it is that other citizens don't care how other citizens act as a motive of that they're paying for their health care, if that makes sense. So that I'm paying for your healthcare, but I'm not telling you, oh, why aren't you going to the gym more? And that's not me paying for your healthcare is not the reason that I would worry about that. But it is a point that politicians will often use, and public health, as the reason for doing these programs and these laws, because it's a very powerful motive. And this was proven to politicians, especially during COVID. I mean, they've had it sort of proved to them in the past, but COVID was a particularly powerful example for British politicians, because they could basically say to the citizens, no, you can't go for a walk because you'll kill grandma. And so I think that saying that you can't smoke outside in the pub garden, in what's often referred to as the smoking garden, that because you will kill the kid, or that you're putting a strain on the health service, rather than individuals caring about how other people act.
Sure. So that makes sense. It being a kind of extension of the COVID rules and mandates that everybody kind of learned to follow. It's kind of like that frog in the boiling water. During COVID, they just slowly turned it up, and now they're saying, well, they tolerated that, so we can just take it a little further. And it's not just smoking. Like in your article, you talked about how it's they also are putting sugar taxes on to try and control people's behavior with eating sugar, and even an attack on junk food or something like that. What other areas are they looking at trying to control people's bodies?
Well, the junk food and the sort of sugary foods is a key example. So it's it's sort of the leisure activities, if you think of it like that. So the duty on alcoholic beverages, especially beer, is increasing every year, and it basically looks like an attack on hospitality, which is something that I mentioned in the piece. But there's they're focusing on smoking at the minute, but the people who are not in favour of smoking necessarily should still be against the smoking ban, because whatever their leisure is, the government will come for that next. But they've not said anything concretely.
Sure. And I guess I would also want to add that they should worry about this, whether they're a smoker or not, because of the moral issue. The issue that I have and the biggest problem I have with these kind of nanny state rules is that it's a complete violation of your own self-ownership. We have ownership over ourselves. That's what makes us free. And when we're free to do with our bodies as we choose, that's the essence of freedom. So when the government starts stepping in and saying, you're free up to this point and not further, and then they keep moving that mark, that is a violation of our own self-ownership. And we have the right to make decisions for our own body, good or bad, and we own the decisions we make, good or bad. But that's what the essence of having self-ownership and the essence of being free. So people should care about whether or not the smoker down the street is allowed to smoke in an area that he's not going to, harm anyone else, just because it's it's a moral issue, and he has a right to his own body. Whether you agree with him putting that cigarette smoke in his body or not is not the issue. It's that he has a right to himself. Do other people over there see it that way?
Well, I couldn't agree more that it is a moral issue, but from my understanding, people don't see it that way. They see it as people infringing on other people's rights because they're smoking near them. And one thing that I would point out is that the evidence that secondhand smoking, which is if I'm smoking and then it's the smoke that's produced from me exhaling the smoke, there's very weak evidence at best that this actually has any health effects on other people inhaling this smoke. So if I'm smoking any secondhand smoke that you inhale, there's very, very weak evidence, if any at all, that that will cause cancer or any negative health effects for you. So that's one thing that I think is important to keep in mind. And just to your earlier question, the UK government, I believe, is also putting a ban on vape products, which is some people claim it's a healthier alternative. I'm not familiar enough with the evidence to say one way or another. But it is interesting that that they are banning a potentially safer option for smoking for people, and also a way for people to quit smoking. But it is a shame that people don't see it like that. The people that I have talked to about this issue tend to see it as, like you mentioned earlier, that it's affecting the rights of the non-smoker. But
sure,
I don't think, you could think of it like driving. I don't think me driving affects the right of the pedestrian.
Right, exactly. It allows for your freedom of movement. That's the point.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I guess the government seems to be kind of going down, and as you put it, this soft authoritarian direction. And it's both of your major parties, right? Your two major parties are the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, right? So where do you see this ending? Where is this going to go? Because it's not just the sugar tax and the smoking. We're hearing a lot of horror stories when it comes to their control on people's thoughts and speech as well. So where do you see this going and ending in the UK?
So it's a really great question. So one thing to note about the smoking ban is that some of the ideas for a tax on smoking in the tobacco industry came from the Labour Party in New Zealand, I believe it is, when Jacinda Ardern either was a minister or was in power. And now, if you look at New Zealand and Australia, there are newsagents or convenience stores that are being firebombed by tobacco gangs to sell their tobacco, which has been made illegal in Australia and New Zealand to sell in these stores. And then these tobacco gangs are firebombing these stores so that the owners of the store sell their tobacco and then pay them tax on it. So that's something to watch out. That's the road that the UK is on at the minute, that they took their idea from 2008 and implemented it in the UK. And I think we're only following that path in terms of smoking. And as you mentioned before about the free speech, I think it's a very dangerous path. I have to say to my American friends that we don't have free speech in the UK. it's unbelievable to say, but I think now more than ever, First Amendment or something akin to a First Amendment is heavily needed. There was an example a few months ago where the Premier League, sort of similar to the NFL in the UK, but for, as Americans would call it, soccer. I think it was the Premier League and Newcastle United were spying on a fan, and that they banned her membership for something that she said. We also have these things called non-crime hate incidents, which is not criminal, but it's important enough to go on your record. So let's say a controversial opinion. Let's say I say that, I don't know, women shouldn't be priests. I'm not saying, that's just an example. And then I tweet that, and then that might get flagged. And then the police will put that on my file. So, and then they will say, it will say non-crime hate incident. And then let's say I go for a job and I apply for that job and the job requires a background check. The employer will see on my file non-crime hate incident 2 or 3 or just 1, but it has no explanation that non-crime hate incident was because I said that women shouldn't be priests. It just says non-crime hate incident. So the employer sees that and go, "Oh, they're a bad person. They're so hateful that it edges on the extent of crime." But without any context. But it's not a criminal offence. But it's something the police feel strongly enough about that they have to put it in a file. And there's another key example of a former police officer, and he tweeted something. I can't remember what it was about. And he received a phone call from the police officer, and he said, and I quote, "We need to check your thinking. We need you to come into the police station because we need to check your thinking."
It's really hard for me as an American to understand this, even though we are fighting the same thing. We do have many pushing for the same kinds of laws over here. I always thank God that we have negative rights instead of positive rights in how our Constitution was constructed, so that it tells our government what they can't do, not what doesn't tell them what they need to do for us. I don't know if that's how yours is constructed too. I just thank goodness that it over here that has always been kind of that hiccup that they can't get around usually. But usually when I talk to people about these things, I like to remind them that it wasn't long ago when things that we wanted to champion as liberty lovers, as people on the left sometimes, those were considered, to be not good ideas. When it comes to the kind of the mob mentality or the public opinion, things like gay rights and trans rights and things like that, things that we would look at as these are individuals and they have a right to their own body and they have a right to live their life the way they want. That was really looked down upon in that. And it took people being able to speak about it and being able to open other people's eyes to move the society in a direction that allowed tolerance. So having free speech, yes, it does allow people that you don't like to speak. It allows people to be able to speak about things that move us in a good and positive direction as well. When you eliminate both, that you would have to say that we have found the pinnacle of exactly what everybody is supposed to be. It's right now, and we're never going to have any new inspirations ever again. So this is where everything is. So shut down the speech, and this is the end. It just doesn't seem to work that way. And I really have a hard time, and I find it very dangerous when we start to forcefully implement these rules. So through like what you guys are talking like of that soft authoritarianism where. But it's not so soft when they're actually imprisoning people. And they are doing that in the UK, are they not?
They're at least jailing people. I'm not sure how long the sentences are for, or if anyone has been convicted, but they're at least trying people and they are arresting some people. There was one example of an elderly gentleman who reposted. He didn't even create the post, but he posted a. Are you familiar with the pride flag? But it has the triangle on one side of.
Yes.
So there's a triangle. Yeah. And somebody, I think it was Lawrence Fox, who's a political commentator and actor in the UK. He put 4 of them together to make it look like a swastika. Oh. So, not in good taste, but I think you should be allowed to say that and do that. It's a form of expression. And this elderly gentleman reposted this on Facebook, so he didn't create the post. And the police arrested the gentleman, the elderly gentleman, and the person who originally created the post was there at the same time, and the police didn't arrest him, but they arrested the elderly gentleman.
Sure.
Who was a veteran as well.
Sure. So in other words, because the guy who created it was too big to bother with, they went after the little guy to kind of scare his audience into not reposting and not following that kind of content.
Yeah. And it's also sort of bigger than that, because we're also clamping down on social media in general from a government perspective. We have something called the Online Safety Bill, which I think the US is something similar, but ours is particularly pernicious. And so it has already passed into law, and is one of another article I wrote. But it doesn't. It fully comes into power next year. I want to say, I think next April, or this upcoming April. And the current Prime Minister Keir Starmer is trying to increase the powers of this online safety bill, which is already quite pernicious. And what he wants to do is, we have a supposedly independent agency called Ofcom, which is it regulates speech. So the TV shows and news shows can and can't say certain things because it's regulated by Ofcom, such as you can't put adverts with swear words on before 9 p.m. or things like that.
Sure. And
one of the things that Starmer is trying to increase the powers of the online safety bill to be able to do is to give the Secretary of State, if I'm not mistaken, powers to censor, basically. So it would create secondary legislation which receives much less oversight by our Parliament, and would basically give him a large majority of the control to choose what is and isn't acceptable, and what Ofcom can and can't pursue, and would eliminate any semblance of independence that Ofcom had before.
It's unreal. So are people starting to wake up to the problems with this and to the negative side? I'm assuming that the people that knew that elderly gentleman must have gone, whoa, wait a minute. But are the everyday citizens starting to wake up to see just how authoritarian this is really becoming? How do they regulate your thoughts, and how do they think that they can do that? Are they starting to wake up to just how over the top this is?
I think so, but more slowly than I would like. So one thing that woke me up in particular was, that you should definitely search this up for yourself, but I believe that a couple of years ago, more people were arrested in the UK for what they put on social media than in Russia. Mm. And there are organizations like the Free Speech Union that are fighting against this this turn to soft authoritarianism, or even authoritarianism at some point in the UK. But in terms of the average citizen, most people seem to be content and are living their lives, and doesn't seem to be an everyday issue, which is something that I'm certainly trying to change. But some people are waking up to it, but just more slowly than I would like.
Sure. Well, I guess if I could give them any advice from the silly American over here, I would just say that they have to remember, yes, in Russia they have those sham elections and everything else, but you don't have a vote if you don't have the consent to have your own mind and your own thoughts. So if they're going to police your ability to believe what you want to believe, to say what you want to say, then you are giving away everything, including your vote, because they no longer need it. They have control of you completely. And so I hope that they do wake up to just the dangers of some of the actions that they're taking. It's shocking to hear that more people are arrested in the UK than in Russia. So I want to ask one more question about this. You'd said before that this was a bipartisan bill when it came to the smoking ban. Are these free speech laws, are these also bipartisan for your two major parties?
Yes. Yeah, they are. So the online safety bill. So when I say bipartisan, I mean that these laws, because there've been various laws against free speech and against smoking in the UK. So it's not just one, just to clarify that. And so bipartisanship, when I refer to these themes, I mean that they received support by both major parties in Parliament, and also when each of the main parties were in power, were in Downing Street, that they beefed up these laws and added to these laws, in a sense, for lack of a better phrase. So in terms of the free speech, we had Theresa May, just as a clear-cut example, who increased the online safety bill's power. So yes, in terms of smoking and free speech, they both receive bipartisan support from the Conservatives and Labour. And one thing I would note is that just as in smoking, that they use public health as their reasoning to clamp down on people's individual freedoms and pleasures, that also for speech, that they're using hate as a motive to clamp down on people's free speech. And just because something is, I don't think you can define hate speech, but something can be hateful. That doesn't mean that it's illegal to say, or it should be illegal to say. It shouldn't.
Right. I agree. So you guys are a little different than we are. We only have really the two major parties. Yes, there's Libertarian Party, but they don't have real power. But you guys are a little different. You have the two major parties, but you also have minor parties that do play significant roles in your government. So if the two major parties are kind of both going down this soft authoritarian path, where can the citizens turn? Like what party is saying, hold it, hit the brakes, we need to turn around? Where can your ordinary citizens turn to try and reverse some of this?
So the party that I would say that citizens would turn to and are turning to is the party called Reform UK. It's not a party that I would necessarily vote for personally, but in terms of going against the trends of the government towards authoritarianism, that would be the best party. It's a populist party currently led by Nigel Farage, who's never in power. He's been a member of parliament a number of times, but he was probably one of the most influential figures in UK politics for his ability to change the conversation. And he was a large reason why the UK actually had Brexit. So he's the current leader of Reform UK. And because they don't expect to get in power, their rhetoric tends to be more populist and less actual policy proposals, rather opposing what the current government is doing. So I would say that Reform UK would probably be the party. It's I would say it's a Thatcherite, so Margaret Thatcher Conservative Party, with some distasteful far-right tendencies, but far and few between. And then I would say the rest of the parties tend to be on the left. So the Scottish National Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, all tend to be sort of broadly left-wing.
Sure. And I do think it's sad because I think we have the same problem that the left used to be the ones that were really pushing for individual freedoms and the rights of individuals to say and do what they want. And unfortunately, they've completely flipped on this in the past 10, 20 years, and it's really, really kind of sad. So I really do hope that that the parties move back to a more sensible direction. I hope that the citizens wake them up, and we'll definitely have to keep looking and keep watching what's happening over there across the pond. So I have one last question for you. It's something that I ask everybody. So if you had the opportunity, say you had the Harry Potter's wand, and you could wave that wand and move us closer to liberty or open people's eyes for liberty, what is something that you would do over at the UK or globally, however you want to spin it?
Sure. So I guess based on the theme of the conversation, I would get rid of all smoking laws. But in terms of a larger answer to your question, I would look to minimum wage laws. I think that minimum wage laws infantilize people, especially younger people who have very little skills, and it doesn't teach them how to negotiate with their bosses. It also limits them in skill development, and I think that the quicker that people develop their skills, their wages increase, and they start paying taxes. And I think when people stop paying taxes, you really become an adult and an active member of society. Say what you want about taxes, but I think that when people there are funny videos of people who receive their first paycheck and they see how much tax gets taken out, and I think there's a libertarian who is born. So
absolutely,
yeah. So I think when people being able to bargain for themselves and increase their skill level and being able to have greater job opportunity, I think that would bring a great deal of liberty to people.
I absolutely couldn't agree more. And I would say that not only the minimum wage laws, it prevents people from gaining skills when they need to gain skills, but it also can be pretty demeaning. And that sounds silly, but if you are somebody who is homeless or you are really struggling and you will do anything to get within reason to get ahead, and somebody has enough to pay you $5 an hour to sweep in front of their store, and they maybe don't really need you to sweep, but they want to help you, that $5 an hour can save your life. So who is the government to come in and say, no, you don't get any, you get $0 an hour because they can't afford to pay you what we deem is what you are worth. It goes, and it also goes back to that moral issue of you having self-ownership. If you choose to offer your labor, it's whatever you choose to offer it for, and they consent to pay you. The government shouldn't have a role in that. This is a bargain between you and another person saying, I'm willing to do this for a certain amount of money, and they're willing to pay you for it, right? It's a negotiation between two parties, and the government shouldn't be able to swoop in and stop that just because you are being paid what they believe that you are deserving of. It just goes right back to that moral issue that we talked about before.
Exactly. And I would also note that it's particularly supported by larger companies because it's something that they can afford, but they know that the smaller companies can't afford, and it gives them a larger share of the market.
Absolutely. Oh, that was a very good one. Thank you. So why don't you tell the listeners where they can follow more of your work?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Oscar Gill-Lewis, GILL-LEWIS. You can find me on Twitter, and you can also find me at wespeakfreely.org.
Awesome. Well, you heard it, Liberty lovers. You better get out there and check out more of Oscar's work and follow what's going on over the pond, on the other side of the pond, because that kind of stuff can happen here too. We have our Constitution, but that's only as good as people are willing to follow it. So check out his work and follow along. While you're online doing that, like I say, jump over and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can also follow us on Twitter. You can follow Nate at Good AM Liberty, And if you want to, you can actually follow me specifically at Josh Martins 13. So follow us on Twitter. You can interact with us there and online. And if you're feeling even, like you want to get a little more GML, you can join the Fed Haters Club. You can interact with the whole Liberty community. So jump on there and become a member. So if you do all those things, I promise, I'm going to be back next time with another exciting person that you all need to know. Until then, remember, you own your choices, each and every one. So make some good ones. I hope you all have a good night, a good day, and a good morning, Liberty.